Hi everyone, welcome to the visual guide for Eden's Gate Descent, also known as E2N. This is the second new 8-man normal raid made available by patch 5.01 in Final Fantasy XIV Shadowbringers. This new encounter has really filled the raid void inside of me that has left me feeling infirm for so long. Without further delay, my name is Mistech and I'll be your raid guide. We begin the fight with Doomvoid Guillotine, which will create a massive bacon strip through the boss across the platform. This AoE will always spawn relative to the boss's position, so be careful as the boss gets moved around throughout the encounter. All players will need to avoid this to avoid damage and debuffs. As soon as that cast goes off, a line of Nyx will spawn in the affected area. Each Nyx will then move across the platform in a specific direction. If a player is hit by a Nyx, they'll take damage and be debuffed. Players will need to quickly discern which way each Nyx is facing and move into the lane behind one to easily avoid the rest. Doomvoid Slicer is a massive donut AoE attack. Players will need to quickly move into the boss's hitbox to avoid heavy damage and debuffs. Next up, another 4 Nyx will spawn at each cardinal point relative to the boss's position. They will move into the boss, damaging and debuffing anyone in their path. To easily avoid this round of Nyx, players can stand at the intercardinal points between each Nyx spawn. Shadow Flame is a heavy-hitting tank buster on both tanks. Cooldown and heal through this as necessary. Darkfire 3 will target 4 players with these large AoE circle markers. Affected players will need to move away to avoid overlapping damage. Unholy Darkness will target a player with the stack up marker. The group will need to stack up with this player to share the incoming damage. From this point on, players will need to handle and expect Spell in Waiting, a buff that will delay the next incoming attack each time it is cast. Luckily for us, the boss gives us a few practice rounds with Spell in Waiting before mechanics begin to overlap. First, players will need to deal with the delayed Darkfire 3. The affected players can spread out in advance, but they'll need to understand that their AoE blasts will not go off until the markers above their heads count down. As such, you can wait to spread apart once the countdown begins. Next, a delayed Unholy Darkness. In similar fashion, the attack damage will take some time to actually apply, and players will need to stay stacked together until it goes off. The next cast will have us overlapping mechanics a bit. 4 players will be affected by another delayed Darkfire 3. Soon after, a player will be affected by another delayed Unholy Darkness. The timing for this first combo has both AoE blasts hitting at the same time. As such, the Darkfire players will need to remain spread, while unaffected players will remain stacked with the Unholy Dark player. Next up, Entropy will deal high raid-wide damage, and the Hand of Erebos will spawn on one side of the platform. This hand will then knock back all players across the platform from that particular side. You'll need to use knockback immunities or position yourself close to the hand side to avoid getting knocked from the platform. This is followed by another Doomvoid Guillotine. Remember that this attack is relative to the boss's position, so adjust as necessary. This incoming line of Nyx will coincide with another knockback from the other side. You'll need to dodge the line of Nyx by moving into a lane behind one, while also positioning to avoid getting knocked off the platform. Move in for Doomvoid Slicer and then dodge the next group of Nyx. Tanks will need to expect one more Shadow Flame cast, and then the boss will cast Entropy again. This time, a number of circles will spawn around the platform that will call down discs. If the discs hit the platform, they will explode and debuff all players. To handle this, a player will need to stand in each circle to block the falling disc. The catch is that standing in the circles will inflict you with a bleed debuff, so healers be ready for a little bit of extra damage during this time. This coincides with the delayed Unholy Darkness. The timing here allows for players to stand in each circle first, soaking each disc before moving into stack with the affected player to share the incoming damage. The tricky part here is that before the stack damage actually goes out, the boss will cast another delayed Darkfire 3. This may seem scary, but players will need to remain stacked for the original Unholy Darkness damage before spreading apart to deal with Darkfire 3. Next, you'll deal with another knockback and another set of circles around the platform. After the knockback, players will quickly need to reposition inside each circle to avoid that high damage and debuff. Another Entropy cast to heal through, and then a player will be targeted with Shadow Eye. This is a room-wide gaze attack from the affected player. All unaffected players will need to turn away from this player to avoid getting petrified. The next Spell in Waiting cast will delay the next Shadow Eye. The same principle applies here, and the group will need to handle some overlapping mechanics while waiting on the timer for the gaze attack to begin before looking away from the affected player. Dodge the next Guillotine and Nyx adds. It's not until the next Doomvoid Slicer that the gaze countdown begins, so as you move into that safe zone, make sure you're not looking at that affected player. From this point on, all of these mechanics will repeat until the boss is down. Spell in Waiting can be tricky at first, and if you're having trouble with the order of each mechanic overlap, remember that you can always watch the markers for their countdowns to help direct direct you. If you have any questions or comments, please let me know. Up next, we'll head into Eden's Gate Inundation. As always, thanks for watching. Till next time.